China. No, don't worry, this is not going to be some rant against the Communist Party for its handling of coronavirus. Take a deep breath and continue watching. Today, I come to you with a story that Americans should be paying attention to: currency. It's been well documented for a long time now that China's Communist Party has been manipulating its currency to get a global advantage. I'm not even going to be talking about that story with you today. However, I am here to talk about the future of currency in China and potentially around the globe. According to a story from Reason.com, China's government is about to release its own digital currency. In fact, it's already testing the currency and digital payment system in 4 different cities: Shenzhen, Suzhou, Chengdu, and Zhongyang, a suburb of Beijing. The system is called DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payment, and we're getting the usual lines from the Chinese Communist Party about the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how surrounding this new form of currency within the country. Mainly that this is not meant to replace cold hard cash, but that it is being put into place to combat things like illegal gambling, drug trafficking, money laundering, and all sorts of other things. Lines, by the way, that we've heard our own government use in regards to getting more access to data and putting in place more financial regulations here at home. Yes, you may say that this is just an experiment, by the way, but it's not a far-fetched idea of a scrambling Chinese Communist Party either. That's because according to the Reason article, some 92% of the people in China already use some form of digital payment, with WeChat Pay and Alipay being the 2 biggest players in that arena. According to an article in August from CNBC, the number was actually closer to 80%, so either way, it's still a huge adoption rate for digital payment platforms to say the least. And given that adoption rate, it's no wonder why the Chinese Communist Party would want in on the game. After all, if they can control the currency, they've now got a reason to also control the payment acceptance platforms in a much greater way. Heck, I would suggest that they'd be likely to cut the middleman out altogether. Why allow WeChat Pay and Alipay to make money off of your digital currency when you can control the supply, the demand, and the execution of transactions with that currency? Which in turn means much more control at the hands of the CCP over its entire populace, and that is not a win for anybody that loves freedom and free markets. You see, digital currency in the hands of a brutal authoritarian regime, or even the hands of our own government, is very dangerous. But Andrew, that can't happen here, right? We wouldn't see our government go digital currency and abuse the data that would be available, right? We've got the Constitution and China doesn't. That may be somewhat true, but I would point you to Obamacare being able to pass, albeit questionably, but being able to pass constitutional muster thanks to how its payment mechanism was instituted. If Obamacare was cool constitutionally because it was a tax, watch the control freaks that are already on high alert for coronavirus find a way around the 4th and 5th Amendments here. Beyond that, we should be paying attention to what China is already attempting, so let's focus less on the theoretical and more on the practical, shall we? First off, we have to remember that we are a global economy, and if you want the billions of dollars of Chinese consumerism, you're going to have to interact with its currency and thus play by the rules of the Chinese government. That may be true now, but imagine what happens with the digital payment. We don't even have to go too far back into the memory bank to look at examples of just how much control the CCP exerts over companies that want to do business within its borders today. Just look at what happened when one top executive for the NBA's Houston Rockets franchise openly backed Hong Kong protesters this past fall. All hell broke loose. Preseason games for the as-yet-to-be-completed 2019-2020 season were canceled by the Chinese, and they threatened the TV and marketing rights as well. Given that those deals were in the tens of billions of dollars, the NBA suits spent much of the next few weeks doing everything but backing up over the Rockets GM that they threw under the bus. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver groveled and begged and did all sorts of work behind the scenes to keep the CCP happy, and thus the billions of revenue into his league's coffers still coming. Now imagine the power the CCP holds over technology companies willing to do business within its borders. We already have companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and countless others touting their free market principles here in America, all the while kowtowing to whatever the Chinese government wants of them just to make sure that their products are open to the Chinese populace. And I get the want of these companies to get into the market there. I mean, it is the country with the world's largest population and all. Getting into that market can only increase your potential for profit, and what business isn't interested in profit? But at what cost? And all of those notions are without China implementing even more controlling measures like their own digital currency would bring forth. I could see China making Disney, Amazon, Apple, or Google have to abide by their digital currency regulations in order to transact in the new digital-only currency, thus data. Make no mistake about it, if this experiment in digital currency goes well, it's the perfect setup for the CCP, as it sees its grip on its populace continue to loosen today. This is a perfect way to assert the control they're so desperate to keep in this connected world we live in. You want to buy goods or have access to their markets, you're going to have to play by their rules, or you're not going to have access to that Chinese buying power anymore. That's a pretty powerful control mechanism for both the consumer and the company, if you ask me. But beyond the Chinese consumer concern is this concern. How will companies be able to securely interact with the Chinese digital currency and ensure that the rest of the world would be safe? I won't go into all the details because Saturday's big show on Mojo 50 Radio is all about what China is doing here in America already. But don't think for a second that China also doesn't see this as a way to get their tentacles further into the global financial markets. Remember, their stated goal is to have their currency become the global standard, replacing the American dollar. And that has all sorts of horrific implications for a government and society that is some $26 trillion in debt, but I digress. You don't think the CCP has grand designs to use this digital currency as a way to infect the systems across the globe and take America down? I hate getting conspiracy theory on you, but just know, you're going to want to tune into Saturday's show as I lay out documented facts of what China is already doing to that very end. But let's get back to the implications for America and Americans for a second. As I've noted, the biggest implication comes in the form of businesses that have given up their free market principles for the access the CCP allows them to have. The Amazons, Apples, and Googles of the world aren't just global goods and service traders either. They're also three of the biggest players in the digital payments world, which means they are going to have to find a way to get their payment platforms to interact with the DCEP or whatever China will call it when it's fully implemented. In turn, that means our level of risk here in America goes up, and we didn't even agree to take that level of risk. Now, I know there is always risk of China's bad actions having implications for the digitally connected parts of our economic way of life today, but we have a choice in the matter. These companies getting further in bed with the CCP takes that choice away. They would be literally opening the front gate to the Trojan horse, and they'd be doing it willingly. But for you, the consumer, you wouldn't have a choice. Don't want to interact with Apple? Buy a PC. Oh, wait, that's got Microsoft and Google embedded into it. Never mind. Don't want to interact with Microsoft? Don't think Apple also isn't in bed with Google for search engines and all of that. Amazon may be easier to exclude from your life, given that you could buy your goods elsewhere, but you likely did that via Googling that product or putting your credit card info into a Google Wallet, which can be easily gotten into by the Chinese government if it wanted to, and even more easily once all those payment platforms were put together. Simply put, without these companies stopping all payment activity in China, once its digital currency is in place, the gates to the rest of the world's payment infrastructure will be made wide open. Now, luckily, there are some very smart and thoughtful people working to see how they can silo this level of data. But again, the more ingrained into Chinese payment structures controlled by the CCP, the more you increase your security risk across the globe. Now, speaking of risk, America wasn't as at risk as many would believe re digital payments. In the pre-coronavirus world, just 10% of transactions in America were of the digital payment variety. It would be easier to pull yourself out of that level of personal and professional risk. Today, those of us in the payment and fraud prevention industry are seeing a crazy 81% increase in e-commerce transactions, let alone the levels of increase in digital payment methods out of fear and convenience during this coronavirus pandemic panic kind of world. That represents a big increase in our risk profile to China's bad intentions, but we could still opt out of this level of risk now. However, if China goes all in on digital currency, this may become a global thing, and there's no putting that cat back in the bag, if you will. As we increase our own usage of those types of payment methods, we are only going to increase our exposure to China's, how shall I say this, without getting suicided? Without their exposure to China's questionable technological history and current wish list, wink, wink. I mean, seriously, what easier way to kill off America being the global superpower than from within its own economic structure? And you didn't even have to lift a finger, right? You literally get to use their own greed and stupidity against them. But beyond the China problem, there is a second issue with digital currency that us freedom-minded people should be worried about, and that would be the level of data and control digital currencies via the government only provides to governments. I personally operate under the premise of DTAFG, don't trust anyone from the government. So maybe I'm biased there. But what I do know, having lived in the world of online payments and data, is that there's a wealth of information that can be gleaned from a single digital transaction, let alone a currency. Today, there are protections from a lot of this in our system. You know, that thing called the Constitution and all. But go to a digital currency and the government would literally have data on things like your whereabouts, your habits, your personality, health and relationship statuses, aspirations, finances, just to name a few. Data is king in today's world, both from a business perspective and the governmental perspective as well. We don't have to go down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories to see how governments are already abusing the data they can collect. It's called the NSA. Now add in access to government-owned digital currency and see what happens. I would suggest there is no longer a need for them to have cameras on the corner or other surveillance methods in place. You'd literally be able to track it all by a digital currency. Look, I love technology and thinking through the future of how technology can work within our own lives. But there's a difference between a willing transaction and data exchange happening between a customer and business and the state having that level of data access in order to even participate in a private transaction. I mean, as it is, we already give up a ton of privacy in our transactional life through things like anti-money laundering laws and so-called know your customer regulations in the financial world today. Ultimately, the issue is this. Would you be more comfortable with a we promise not to look at the data or we don't have the data situation when it comes to government access to your daily financial life? Put another way, do you want them to have access to the code for the front gate of your house, or they would have to ring the bell to be let in? Which version do you think the government would prefer? When it comes to the government, I am not willing to sign up to let them just have that access. Luckily, I think the Constitution precludes that from happening, but given what we just saw come out of the Michael Flynn and FBI's entrapment of him, I wouldn't trust the government as far as you could throw him. And please spare me the if you have got nothing to hide, what worry do you have argument either. Put together the privacy concerns with the chance for China to do its nefarious thing, and digital currency has a lot of issues that are too big for us to put to the side. What say you? Leave a comment below or hit me up on social media at The Coppin Show. I'll see you on Saturday at 5 p.m. Central Time on Mojo 50 Radio for the big show. Tune in on iHeartRadio or watch via the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page. Until then, be safe, be smart, and Matthew 5:44.